and welcome back to episode 2 of CAFO Crimes. Today, we'll be discussing what exactly concentrated animal feeding operations are and the systems that allow them to persist despite the substantial ethical and environmental harms. So, CAFOs are facilities that house more than 1,000 animal units, where animal units are defined by weight. So, 700 milking cows, 1,000 beef cows, 2,500 hogs, or 82,000 laying hens. They do not produce their own feed, and in fact, 60% of the cost of a CAFO goes toward buying that feed. And we'll get a little bit more into how that works later. They supply 90% of the US meat supply. And speaking of which, the US meat and dairy production has more than doubled, while the number of operations has decreased by 80%. What this means is that the amount of land used for animal farming has decreased in proportion to the number of animals farmed on that land. So the goal of a CAFO is to cram as many animals as possible onto as small a parcel of land as possible. So chickens typically get about your average size of paper to spend their whole lives on. Calves are put into tiny veal crates so they can't graze. And pregnant pigs, for the first few weeks of their pregnancy, are placed in gestation crates, probably for their safety, as there are instances of pigs trampling their companions. They do require a little less maintenance than your average free-range farm because the animals are so close together that farmers can collect eggs, herd cows where they need to go, etc., pretty easily. So, moving on to some of the environmental impacts, they contribute to 56% of greenhouse gas emissions from the food sector. Globally, animal products provide only 18% of our calories, but use 83% of our farmland. Cattle farming, in particular, is directly responsible for 71% of Latin American deforestation, making it the single largest driver of deforestation across the region and resulting in an annual forest loss of 2.71 million hectares. And so the annual dry weight of livestock feces is 13 times more than the humans produce, and manure impairs 40% of rivers and streams. And contrary to popular belief, most of the emissions from agriculture are not from cow belches or flatulence, they're from the manure. So more about the river and stream impairment in Iowa in particular, where a lot of US farming takes place. Excess nutrients enter water, and when that happens, algae thrives and it takes up all the oxygen, and so aquatic life dies off. And that creates a hypoxic dead zone, which results from harmful algal blooms. The hypoxic dead zone fueled by Iowa is off the Gulf of Mexico, so just thinking of downstream effects of CAFOs too. So I talked a little bit about the health impacts of CAFOs in our last episode, but why exactly is respiratory illness such a big issue? I mean, it's just fumes, right? Well, organic dust contains a wide array of particulates like allergens, toxic gases, organic dusts, and microbial cell wall components, which activate innate immune receptor signaling pathways. And exposure to swine and cattle facilities is more likely to trigger the onset, at least compared to chicken facilities. And 50% of swine farmers or workers are at risk of developing respiratory tract symptoms. Lung quality over time also decreases. Even one-time exposure to swine barns triggers an acute inflammatory response 100-fold. So, considering the ethical and environmental really big issues associated with CAFOs, why are they still a thing? Shouldn't there be a legal framework to prevent their existence? There should, but there aren't any. So there are no economic or legal penalties for abusing animals or degrading the environment. Even though CAFOs are unnecessary, even if we can get the same amount of meat from a greater number of medium-sized animal feeding operations, even if it requires 13 pounds of grain to produce a single pound of beef, and if grains would be put to better use if they weren't filtered through animals, if we want to feed our rising world population. Um, and so, what are those legal frameworks that allow this to persist? The first, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, which was originally included in the 1985 Farm Bill to help small farmers meet new EPA regulations. And for the first 17 years, it was relatively small and did benefit small scale farmers. But since then, it's expanded to include CAFOs and provide them with a lot more funding than organic and small scale farmers receive. And how does it decide which operations to prioritize? By their potential environmental damage. So, for example, it encourages water pollution by paying for the transportation and spreading of manure over cropland, which is an issue when manure outweighs the nutritional needs of the plants because those nutrients just wash into streams. Um, and some indirect subsidies include those provided by feed subsidies. So, again, feed constitutes 60% of the CAFO cost, and the government lowers the cost of soy and corn, which are the primary ingredients in hog feed, and that benefits CAFOs more than small scale farmers. And then another indirect subsidy, the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, which supports American agriculture by buying surplus meat and dairy products. And so that's just kind of an enabler there. Anyway, so these are why CAFOs exist, why they're problematic, and next episode we'll discuss what to do about it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on CAFO Crimes.